Guys, welcome back to another over-the-board chess tournament. I came back today and I'm recording these recaps for you. In the first round of Montreal Open 2025, I was playing Marin Kiriakov 1895 FIDE rating. As you might see on your screen, there were 7 rounds, the time control is 90 minutes plus 30 seconds. I was 18th seed in the starting rank. I believe there were about 80 people in total, and you will see how I did throughout next 7 days. First round, my opponent starts with e4. So I came to Montreal last Wednesday, and the pairing came out kind of late. It came out, I guess, at 6:30 and round started at 7. So I didn't really have time to prepare, but I knew that he is going to play e4 and then knight with bishop e2. And I looked at some lines and I was like, okay, I know something, but let's see what he plays. So c5, knight goes to f3, d6, that's what I usually play. d4 takes knight d4, knight f6, attacking the pawn f4, knight c3, a6, main knight of position, and here there are a bunch of moves. I play h3 with white. People play bishop g5, which is the most aggressive option. Bishop c4 became quite popular recently as well. But bishop e2, it's a more solid, calm option. People play it. The positions are more or less fine for black. And I looked at some of the games before the round and played e5. Knight b3, bishop e7, bishop e3, and now, let's say if I go castle, it would be a bit early because now white can push g4 and try to play g5. That's actually a good trap for white, for players who are playing this with white, because look, castle looks very logical, and many people might think, all right, I'll just continue with my development. Like, he's gonna castle next for sure, but no. g4, and suddenly there are a lot of attacking possibilities for white pieces. You can actually try playing it with white pieces against neither, bishop e2, bishop e3, and then if they go castle early, you go g4 and then try to push g5, h4, and try to advance on the king side and then push your knight to d5 square. But of course I'm well aware of it because, when I was a kid, believe me, I lost a couple of times in this line. Bishop e6, now knight goes to d5, that's kind of one of the main lines. Knight bd7, queen d3, protecting the pawn on e4. So what happens, let's say, if I immediately take on e4? It looks like a free pawn, but no, bishop b6, and now after queen c8, knight c7, he takes an exchange. Yes, after knight d7, I kind of take something, either knight or bishop, but exchange is an exchange. And it's, of course, winning for white. So I go knight bd7, protect from bishop b6, he goes king d3, protecting on e4, and now I go castle. So the moves I looked at before the game was a4, and then I have to take on d5, or c4, and then I'll have to play b5. But castle is something that I knew was possible, and I managed to look at some of the games before the round started, and I looked at Alexander Grishuk with black pieces. So take on d5, and now Grishuk played knight e8, and that's what I played as well. The plan is simple. You want to go f5, you want to go f4, e4, knight e5, and try to launch an attack on the king side, while white will try to get as much space as possible on the queen side and try to break through. So what happened on the board was a4, so taking space. Now I go bishop g5, trading dark sword bishop. That's a typical idea in Najdorf. If something else is played, I believe there could be some f4 ideas. So at f4, I don't really want to allow it, because then, I don't want to take, because then knight jumps to g4 and f5, and then, even something like f5, potentially g4, and then, like, you never know. Like, it looks like I want to attack on the king side, but at some point it's just like, okay, white can switch and try to do it themselves as well. Let's say 5, rook a4, and then try to bring the rook across fourth rank. Okay, bishop g5. trading this off. a5, rook c8. Now the idea is to take on f3, and if queen f3, rook c2. So to kind of provoke this f takes e3 capture, but c4. Of course, now I take, and after queen f3, as you might see, white have kind of more space, and I started to think like, what would be my plan here? f5 looks logical, and I play it immediately. I mean, you're right, I have nothing else. Now knight d2, and now it turns out that white are trying to push b4, c5, bring the rook, and try to attack me on the queen side. And my pawn structure on the queen side is actually quite bad, because you know, in all these setups, when you play this position with black, it's often very useful to play something like b6 and then push a5. Let's say a4, a5, but at least white don't take as much space as they did in the game after the following position after a5. Because now the pawn structure is bad, and I always have to deal with a lot of breakthroughs in the future. So knight d2, b4, c5. So as you might see, b6, a5 would have been more advanced, and I would have less problems than with this structure, because now ideas like rook a3, rook b3 in the endgame might be very annoying, and this pawn on b7 will always be a huge problem. So I knew if I don't attack on the king side, I'll be in a huge trouble. So knight ef6, he goes f3, and I didn't like this move. What I calculated was f4, and we discussed it a lot after the game during our analysis. b4 is something that would be played anyways, but f3, I mean, doesn't look that good, and I immediately used this move to play knight h5 and try to bring my knight to f4, because now f3 blocked this bishop from e2. b4. And at this point, I knew that it should be kind of equal, but again, I should be extremely careful not to allow the c5 maneuver. I go rook f6. My plan is to go rook g6 or rook h6 and try to checkmate. Rook c1, rook g6, and now bishop f1. So one thing I want to show you what I calculated here is, let's say if I play knight f4 immediately, and now let's say if basically something like rook c1, there is queen g5, and black are simply winning the game because I'm threatening to checkmate. And if bishop f1, unfortunately this queen is hanging, and I have knight h3 check, and king h1, queen f3, and I win a queen. So there was still a room to blunder, but after knight f4, of course, I calculated the simple g3 would not have any problems for white. Like, white don't have to go rook c1 and blunder. Because yeah, rook c1 or rook this a1, queen g5, and suddenly it turns out that, and the queen protects, knight h3 again fork. So yes, there is something to blunder, there is always something to blunder, so I decided, okay, rook f6. For now I don't want to rush, I want to bring as many pieces as possible to attack inside, and then try to come up with something. Rook c1, rook g6, bishop f1, queen s7, not to allow the c5. Knight b3, and the problem is, guys, c5 was always possible. You know why? Because let's say c5, d takes c5, b takes c5, rook c5, takes, and let's say takes. Yes, white are down a pawn, but the problem is now c file. And as I said, this pawn structure is awful, and he could have used it at any point, but he was too scared, and I didn't even see that c5 worked. Like, c5 worked in so many lines because of the weakness of the c line and the pawn structure with b7, a6. Because look, this light squared bishop is always watching towards this a6 pawn, and the position I showed you here, a5, this light squared bishop is not watching towards my a6 pawn. This bishop will be traded eventually. I can go knight c5, knight d7, bishop g5. So one problem solved, but in the following position, it's just so bad. Like, this pawn structure is awful. I go queen h4. I'm trying to kind of scare him that c5, I'll play queen b4, but even c5 here worked out perfectly, because here he had c6. And once again, that's why, you know, you gotta analyze your games, because look, I would never allow this pawn structure ever again in my life, because once he played a5, this b7, a6, now you kind of know the typical ideas. Like, I would have had a lot of problems if he was to find the best moves. And Yes, I mean, I'm looking at it now. I'm like, how on earth? Like, I've been playing Knight for so many years, and b6 a5 is something that I've done before, and in this game, it's just I just forgot about it, and you see what happened. I mean, it just a bit unfortunate, but I'm still good. Queen a1. So he's trying to protect b4, and he's trying to attack my queen. Obviously, trade queen. I go queen f4, and now the problem is this pawn is hanging. I also keep an eye on this h. So I also want to show you a cute checkmate around here. Let's say something like queen h4, rook c1, rook f6, rook c2, rook h6, rook c1, and now f4, and let's say queen f2, and there is queen h2, king h2, knight g3, king g1, rook h1 checkmate. So I always was looking out for this this setup, but it never worked out really, and you know, was a bit unfortunate. And I think, let's say, what if you go something like queen f2 here? Because even something like this, I spent some time calculating if it works, but I was like, I don't see a checkmate here. So king f7, threatening g6, but there is simple g4. And now g6, king goes to g5, and suddenly there is no checkmate, and white are still holding. That's something that I was kind of looking at, but it never worked out. So he goes king h1, now I go rook h6, and now once again queen h2, f4, knight g3, rook h1 checkmate. Okay, now f2 squares of course here, but rook c3. And that was the only blunder he made throughout the game. Like, as he said after the game, it was a blind spot, and yeah, I mean, that's just very unfortunate. King g1 back would have still been equal, but after rook c3, I mean, it's easy to spot, and you might see, yeah, blunder, knight g3, king g1, knight f1, and it turns out that this pawn is hanging. And now the best move was g3, kind of transposed to the following position, but of course it's completely lost. So it happened again, queen f1, queen h2, and now e4, I'm trying to breed my knight, queen h4, g3, queen f6, and now knight e5. You know what I also looked at during, I think around that moment? Oh yeah, I looked at rook h2. The thing is, after king h2, I was like, okay, knight e2, and if king goes, let's say, to h3 or h1, I go queen h6 checkmate. But what I forgot about that after knight e2, he can go g3, and I'm actually losing. So, you know, it just, you don't want to sacrifice. Sometimes you have to calculate stuff, because if you watched my recap from Toronto Open of the first round, I had an absolute win position, +5, and I decided to sack some pieces, and it didn't work out, because that one extra piece gave him the only defensive maneuver. So yeah, and I ended up losing the game. But here I was like, okay, why do I need to sack when I can just take the pawn, bring my knight, and yes, it's now hopeless. Knight d3, he sacrificed an exchange, after queen d5, he resigned, and I started my tournament with a win. As far as accuracy goes in this game, 93.7 from myself. As you might see, the things started going wrong around this point, but everything went well for him during the first part of the game, and then ba-bam. So yeah, 2450 performance from him and 2500 from myself. One blunder only, and he played decent. I mean, he played decent chess. It just, yeah, you kind of have to feel this in yourself to push the c5, to use this bad pawn structure. But that's a lesson for both of us. Like, this c5 worked. Like, you know, those small nuances you learn after analyzing the games, like, that's just why it's so important to analyze. Because, you know, now I'm looking at it again, I'm like, how could I allow this pawn structure to happen? b6, a5, and a5, and I'm good, but then b7, a6, very passive. I always have to deal with it, to watch out, while b6, a5, and I can simply attack on the king side. But yeah, it is what it is. I hope you enjoyed. I'll see you in the recap of round number 2 tomorrow. Stay tuned. Bye-bye.